Well, welcome everyone. The conference has been moving along very smoothly. It's great to see all the participation out there, and kudos to Craig and the team for once again pulling off an event in these really odd times of COVID. But the one thing it does is it lets us get a bunch of different people in the room sometimes, Mark, where you couldn't get away from your office to make it to the conference, but you can from your home, so that's good. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Sandi. Nice to see you.
How are you?
Very well. You know, like you said, it's very convenient.
I'm just here. Sorry, guys. I'm just hearing the backstage still, if I can get out of that. Anne-Marie? I'm hearing you backstage, Anne-Marie. Okay, I think we're good. Are we good? Mark, you're there now, right?
I sure hope so. Everything good?
Awesome, great. Well, listen, this session is all about, really all about whether Canada can compete on a world stage, what we might need to do to help Canada compete on a world stage, and maybe a little bit about policy when Minister Schweitzer comes in. But if he's not here, we can talk about what the governments are doing right or wrong anyway, Mark, so that works well. So let me just start really, Mark, with the ecosystem that's required to build and scale large companies in Canada. So, you know, from ideation to IPO, let's say, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to help along the way. What do you think the role of incubators and accelerators can be for those companies in the very early stage? And do we have enough of them? Do we need more? Talk a little bit about that accelerator environment that you've seen.
Sure. So, I mean, I think Canada has made great strides over the last decade in the early stage company creation, the ideation, and the general venture capital early stage funding. If we go back roughly 10 years ago, the Canadian landscape was very dry. It was some US firms coming north, picking off some Canadian, early stage companies, not much in the way of local VC. My business partner, John Ruffalo, founded Omers Ventures in 2011, and that started to significantly increase the scope of venture capital available in Canada. Fast forward 10 years later, and while we can always use more, it's not the biggest gap we have in our innovation ecosystem to scale companies to the global stage. We have what Giles Garrison, who's Deputy Minister in Ontario, coined the term Christmas tree farm. And while he applied it to Ontario, it applies equally well to Canada as a whole, in that we didn't have much of a farm to begin with. We're now pretty good at planting trees. We get them to a decent size, and then they get sold out, they cap out, typically bought out by a foreign firm, American predominantly, or control buyout, or a significant minority piece sold to a foreign firm. And all of the wealth creation that occurs subsequent to that transaction accrues outside of our country. To the extent it's an outright sale, all of the IP, all of that wealth creation fully leaves our country. So I think at the moment we have a decent Christmas tree farm, but we're lacking a lot of the biggest gap we have, the biggest white space, is scaling from that 50 million in revenue to the billion range, where we distinctly are lacking in talent, capital, and to a certain extent clients. To get beyond that, they typically have to leave, those businesses have to leave Canada. They need to expand into Europe, Asia, or the US, some other global market. Can Canadian companies do it? 100% we can. But it is sometimes that absence of capital, even if we have the talent, forces the transaction. All it takes is 1 weak link to kind of force that transaction. So Maverix was founded only a month ago, and we're one of the first players in the kind of classic growth equity stage. And we very much got to focus on scaling or helping provide that scaffolding needed for Canadian companies to expand onto the global stage. So, I do think we can do more across the board, early stage through growth. and Canada as a whole can do more on the IP and broader innovation system, which we'll talk more about. But, you know, we're light years ahead of where we were 10 years ago. We're still a Christmas tree farm.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that these things can't happen overnight. You know, I sit in the province of Alberta, which is a little bit behind in some other provinces, as we always say here. But everyone says it's going to happen tomorrow, right? It is a long journey to get the foundation there to help these companies grow. What's really nice about Maverix, obviously, is that now there's somebody that can write a $20 million check, which there weren't many firms in Canada that could do that before, right? So I like the fact that we have this ability now to really use Canadian VC to support the growth stage so companies don't need to leave. Well, let's talk about companies leaving for a second. Is it so bad that a company, you know, sells out to an American company? Is there a kind of a flywheel recycling that can happen with that founder starting again or funding the next one? What do you think about that?
I mean, you're right. There's a recycling of talent that occurs. And I guess at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what are we ultimately solving for? Right. And, you know, speaking back to the Maverix perspective, our 10-year wish list and long-term target is to help and contribute significantly to reshape the innovation ecosystem in Canada. Canada right now, its standard of living is arguably, we're living beyond our current means, but it's unduly supported by raw resource extraction. And what we have not done a good job is building a taxable digital wealth base to sustain our future standard of living. There's all kinds of legacy policy things that are continuing to flow through. But for me, the objective of everybody in our country should be to build a sustainable, taxable digital wealth base. What that means is we have to begin to retain intellectual property, which is the basis upon which, you know, the digital wealth is based. Every time one of our companies sells to a foreign company and that IP leaves our country, Canadians pay economic rent on that intellectual property to foreigners, and we lose a little chunk of our national wealth and a chunk of our ability to sustain our standard of living. So while I can see a founder making 20, 30, 20, 50, whatever the number is, $1 million, putting it in their jeans, retiring or recycling into the next, you know, Christmas tree, it doesn't do much to really sustain our
sustainability,
sustain our country long term.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the value add. You know, Canada is really good at creating a product and not adding any value to it and sending it out the door, whether that's our lumber, our oil, or our dairy, or our agriculture, or wheat, whatever, right? So we've got to consider how we can actually add value to our products before they're leaving the country, because like you said, we send them out, they add the value, we buy them back. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, it's not a great long-term trade. And, you know, I think if we had Minister Schweitzer, he would have his, you know, sort of his perspective. But, you know, Canada is both hobbled by its philosophy of big government, where government believes it can do everything and doesn't need to engage the private sector. That should be one thing that we do, is utilize market-proven Canadian companies. We saw it in COVID. We see it in every day's newspaper about, you know, the wage subsidy and how it rolled out. The Canadian government had extensive opportunities to engage market-proven fintech to roll out different types of, you know, loans, plans, subsidies, and they chose to do it all in-house and were therefore restricted by the tools that the CRA had, which resulted in this very broad scope, you know, approach to policy. So big government thinks they can do it better. I think that's been a long-term impediment to our innovation. That said, government does have a role, particularly in the areas of natural resource extraction and the value added on them. That, in my view, should be a specific area of government intervention or focus to add a value added IP layer on top of our canola production, on top of our forestry. We've done a good job in the private sector in oil and gas and in Alberta in general with oil field technology. And Canadian miners are known around the world for their tech. Yeah. But, you know, the IP in the industrial technology space typically falls outside of all of the ecosystems that we currently talk about every day. And that's a place where the government should probably be focusing a little bit of time, have a national IP strategy, data strategy to build a value added layer. That should be like, one of the first things that get done.
So you talked about fintechs not being able to support the rollout of the subsidies, COVID subsidies. There's a lot of fintech people on the call today and people that are connected to really financial services, but we continue to be challenged by regulatory, at least everyone says we're challenged by our regulatory regime as far as open banking, access to personal data, all of those things that would help a fintech actually gain some, so obviously some pilots, some proof of concepts, some minimal viable products, and ultimately a global product. What are your thoughts on the whole concept of allowing these fintechs to play in a world that we have a bunch of big banks?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's a real issue. Canada has since forever traded off stability associated with the banking oligopoly with kind of innovation and change. And the more innovation and change you have, the less stability you have in your kind of financial system. When protecting systemic risk, there's Doug. In terms of systemic risk, the regulators have been protecting systemic risk at basically all costs, promoting, the banks, the fintechs, and the regulators have good reason to do that. If we take a look at just say, what have consumers done with their personal data? They've given it away for free and created however many trillions of market cap value for companies who exploit it. What would happen if the same thing, instead of being personal data, was personal finances, dollars, cents, real wealth? We would see the rapid evaporation of individual wealth. So I do think there's a need for consumer protection. The regulators are right to be doing that. Is Canada overly conservative? I think that the answer to that is yes. Has that over-conservatism been rewarded in past banking crises?
Like in 2008, yes.
Yes, it has. So, it's been positively reinforced, which makes it a harder, principle to abandon.
Yeah, exactly. Minister Schweitzer, welcome.
Thanks for having me here. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We're ready to roll now.
Right on. It's not like you guys are busy doing anything out there with all the stuff that's going on with our economy and COVID and all those sorts of things. So glad that you take a little bit of time to be with us today. For those of you that haven't met Doug, I've had the pleasure of meeting Minister Schweitzer on a number of occasions as we try to navigate the course of what we're doing for innovation in Alberta. So welcome, Minister Schweitzer.
I really appreciate it. Yeah, looking forward to this discussion here and learning lots today.
Yeah, right on. Good. Mark and I have been talking about a couple of things around, whether we can create big global scale companies here, the fact that our companies oftentimes get sold too early. What's the role of private capital in helping those companies stay here? But now we've got a government policy guy on the call. Where does the government play a role here, Doug? We talked a little bit about whether the incubator accelerator world and that whole ecosystem needs to be supported. We need the seedlings to grow into the Christmas trees that Mark and I were just talking about, and then create a huge forest after that. Where do you think, in what your new role with innovation and jobs in Alberta, where do you think the government plays a role in that early stage space?
Well, I think there's a role for government, but I also think it's the mindset of the entrepreneurs and the business community itself. You need that confident mindset that you're going to go on there, take on the world, that you can be a global company. We've seen that in Alberta historically, building sizable energy companies, international players, big market caps. And we're starting to see a huge momentum across Canada and really that developing fintech space, particularly in Alberta, where these folks here, maybe it's just a little bit the drinking water in Alberta, but they're thinking big, they're thinking global, and they're accessing that capital. From a government perspective, we want to make sure that we have the talent pipeline coming in, the talented people that can help take those companies to the next level, as well as creating the right ecosystem for venture capital investment, We're also right now in Alberta investing in accelerators. So it's pulling on all those levers, but it's also the business community having that mindset of we can go take on the world.
Do you think, Mr. Schweitzer, that sometimes the traditional wealth in Canada hasn't got their feet wet into the digital economy and how these companies can build and grow? How do we start to create awareness about the success stories that we have in Canada? Because we have many, but how do we create awareness about that?
I just think that there's a real shift happening. And I think a lot of it's happened in the last 12 to 24 months, particularly in the province of Alberta, where, over the last few decades, there have been some folks that have done exceptionally well with kind of our conventional economy. A lot of that's commodities driven in Alberta, but many of them now are becoming far more sophisticated. They see the growth and the trajectory of the technology and the fintech space in particular. And we're starting to see successes on the ground, particularly here in our province, where companies are going from a handful of employees one year to 250 plus, with trajectories of getting up over 500 in pretty short order. So there's becoming a familiarity in the business community that education and sophistication is growing. So I just think it's full steam ahead right now for Alberta in particular and for Canada. You're seeing momentum. It seems like almost every day you're seeing a new unicorn popping up in BC or Toronto, and that's encouraging to see across this country.
Right on. Mark, what about the valuations of those companies as they're gaining momentum? Are you seeing valuations rise a little bit right now with our companies?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe statement. I think everybody's seeing it. Expectations have risen. We're at this interesting point of extremely loose monetary and fiscal conditions, creating pretty targeted financial asset inflation. We've seen multiple expansion over the last couple of years of probably 50% compared to 2 to 3 years ago for similar stages of investment. That's just pure rock. Company A is the same as company B, just 3 years later, and the multiple's up a good 50%. We're seeing that being driven in the public markets as well, demand for investment assets. We're also at a point where it looks like inflation. The big debate is inflation going to continue? The stocks that get hit the hardest are the growth stocks that get hit harder in an inflationary environment and as rates start to go up. So the question is, are we at peak valuations? I think that's the debate everybody's asking themselves. There's no question that the valuations have run up like houses, or comic books, or trading cards. They've all skyrocketed.
Yeah, right on. So now here's the pitch for Alberta. Our housing prices aren't as high as the rest of the country, so it's a good place to come. Bring your family, bring your talent. I could go on and on and on about the benefits of Alberta for sure. But you're right. Everything seems to be creeping up there right now, no doubt. Doug, what's your role working with the other jurisdictions across the country? Do you guys get together and talk about how you can strengthen Canada's global competitiveness?
We have regular conversations with my counterparts. I'm the Jobs, Economy, and Innovation Minister, so it's kind of that industry ministry historically in Canada. So we have regular conversations with provincial counterparts as well as with our federal counterparts, like Minister Champagne at the federal level, talking about how do we build out this ecosystem from artificial intelligence, quantum computing, other things that are going to be the backbone long term. What do we have to do at our post-secondary institutions? What do we have to do to get that talent pipeline here in Canada from young Albertans here that want to grow up and have opportunities in these fields, as well as immigration policy? It's a global race right now for talent. How do we make sure that we have a welcoming policies that bring that talent here into Canada?
Yeah, and immigration is going to be key, obviously, to ensuring that we have the pipeline of talent that's going to support these companies that are here, because we're going to need the people to grow those companies for sure. Mark, what's been your experience of the companies that you've been involved with over the years and finding talent, and how are they finding that talent? Because as we all know, this is a real issue for us here.
Yeah, I mean, talent in right now across the board in innovation land is tight in Canada. We're continuing to see, existing companies expand, seeing some real constraints, companies experimenting with offshoring, Romania, Brazil, obviously India and others are already still strong. We are seeing a dispersion of that talent from some of the main centers. I was on with a company this morning based in Toronto, and a lot of their engineering team has been migrating into rural parts of Canada, which is driving some of that housing rise that you're seeing in other parts. So we're seeing talent disperse right now, but immigration is absolutely key. Retaining our existing talent, we spend billions a year in education. We have a highly educated workforce, and retaining them in Canada is critical. We were just Maverix was able to attract a managing partner out of the US last 2 decades has been in the US, brought him back and repatriated him back into Canada in a bit of a brain gain. We need the right types of policies and opportunities to reverse the brain drain and continue to retain that talent in Canada. That's absolutely the lifeblood of our future innovation economy.
Yeah, we always say, are we doing enough to keep our talent here? Are we doing enough to recruit new talent here? And what about the expats that have left, and can we bring them back as well, right? Minister Schweitzer, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, and I just think this pandemic has really brought into light the flexibility of workforces. For the longest time in the finance world, people thought you had to be in downtown Toronto on Bay Street. And Bay Street's pretty much been closed for about 14, 15 months right now, people working from home. And we really are starting to see that trend where the workers get to pick where they want to be. And this is where I'm making that plug. I live in Calgary. Let me use this as an example. You're not going to find a city of 1 million+ people with this infrastructure, this affordability, and this momentum in the technology space. Plus, you can pick where you want to work. I think it's a huge value proposition. Alberta right now, and particularly my hometown of Calgary, are buys. And really that is all about talent. And this is the place that I think young Canadians can come and be successful. You can't afford to get on your feet in Vancouver or Toronto right now with $1.5 million homes, but we are here.
Right on. I always say the same thing for sure. It is true. Canada as a whole is a beautiful place to live, and good standard of living, and the things that we can attract good immigration. We were talking the other day about how do we support those young immigrants that are coming in to actually build their companies here, because we see a lot of young companies now that are led by new Canadians. They don't have that natural network of where to go and find the capital through that initial friends and family round. What can we do to support those new Canadians that are starting companies, Mark?
Well, I think you raised a great point. We see, I haven't run the exact math, but I'd say a substantial majority of the opportunities in relatively advanced stages are led by relatively new Canadians, either new or first generation. And they tend to come with a level of open-mindedness, global competitiveness, keenness, and work ethic that you need as an entrepreneur to drive things forward. So I think, the early stage saplings, the early stages of the Christmas tree farm, are filling in. Being able to continue to allow these trees to grow into the forest is where we need to continue to focus. And then once we've got that forest, or as we build the forest, we need some things like a national data strategy. We need some coordinated immigration. We need, some strategic government supply chain focus. We need some of the value added capital in some of those natural resource extraction areas that we discussed, to make their forest really vibrant. And so those are some of the additional layers that we'll need to build on over time.
Right on. So I told you this would go by fast. We've got about 5 minutes to wrap it up here. And one of my last questions was, can Canada's companies compete on the world stage, and are we doing enough to get them there? And that comes down to are we building big ambitions with our Canadian entrepreneurs, and how do we get them to think globally instead of, well, I'm going to expand to Ontario first, and then I'm going to go into BC. How do we get them to think big, Mark?
I think they're thinking big. I mean, there's lots of people in this conference, and I don't think Canadians have any issue thinking big. I don't think it's a confidence or an attitude issue. I think they hit certain glass ceilings, or there's certain weak parts of the scaffolding that cause instability and cause a sale to a foreign business, or some additional type of traction. And so I don't think it's attitude, confidence, or skill at all. I mean, I'm an Albertan as well. I dualism that Alberta has. I think it's ripe to turn around. It's got some of the right tax policies. And it's certainly got the work ethic and the highly educated labor force to do it. I don't think dreaming big is the issue at all.
Okay, right on. I like that. I like to hear that. Minister Schweitzer, what do we need to do to help our people understand that they can really compete on a world scale?
Well, I just think that again, it's creating that culture of confidence where people are going to want to go take on the world. And again, perfect example here, right? Homegrown company in Calgary called Cement. They got some of the world's largest telcos as clients already, not just in Canada, but in the world as clients. And this company is just on the rise right now. So it's having that confidence to go out there, build those bridges internationally, go get those customers that you need to establish that, that income stream into your business. And I think these Canadian companies now are really starting to hit their stride. You've got that aggressive mindset in these entrepreneurs. In Alberta, like again, I use the traditional drivers, kind of that confidence before. Like 20 years ago, like Alberta companies were taking on the world, and now you're seeing this next generation of entrepreneurs that are in the technology space with that exact same mindset. And I just think these companies are ready to go. They're really hitting their stride right now. And again, some of it is policy framework, like he was mentioning around tax policy. We were bringing in that reform here. We've got the lowest corporate taxes now in Canada, North America, when the US goes their direction. So creating that right framework for success long-term.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that really works is role models. And as we see more Shopify's and more Siemens and more Benevides, and that's really helps our entrepreneurs understand you can actually do it big and you can do it here. So, that role model really helps. And the more winners we have, the better it is for the next generation coming up or the next entrepreneur coming up. Plus, as I said, that flywheel starts and we start to recycle some of the talent and the capital, which really works as well. Any parting shot for us, Mark?
No, I just think that the more IP we can retain in our borders, the better we will be longer term. That means closing. If there's SRED credits, we retain the IP in Canada. It means if we have universities commercializing IP, the IP has to stay in Canada. It can't go offshore. And I think that we should be targeting in a lot of any policy we can to build out our IP base.
And Minister Schweitzer, you've been doing some work on the IP side in Alberta, right?
Yeah, and there's lots of work that we're doing right now around data, government data. We have one health authority in our province. How do you make sure you use that data best to make sure you take care of people's health, save thousands of lives here, but it has applications internationally as well, where you could save millions of lives around the world. So looking at how we can use government data as well, thoughtfully bring that out, as you addressed earlier on, around intellectual property, creating that right framework for our province long-term. But a big part of it as well is around talent, getting the right talent developed right here in Alberta for the long-term and in Canada as well. Like, we just cannot lose sight of the fact that it's talent development is key long-term.
Right on. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I think that's the end of our session today. It's been fantastic to have you both here. Mark, thrilled to see the Maverix fund start and get up and running here, because we know we need that capital for the growth. Mr. Schweitzer, nice to see your child there behind you in the background.
It's homeschooling here in Alberta.
What work from home means like for all of us. So that's awesome. And thanks for spending the time. I know life is hectic for you today. So I'm glad you were here. And to everyone that is participating in FFCon, I hope you're getting some great tidbits to take back home and build big companies and work on the global scale. I'm signing off. Ciao.
Thank you.